Whenever I get recommended a training video with science-based in the title, I instantly click the not interested button and move on. Why is that? Is science-based training really that bad, or is it something else? I was thinking about that recently, and I came to the conclusion it's not actually science-based exercise I don't like, it's people. When I think science-based, the image that comes to mind is of uninspired salesmen, guys without a single ounce of creativity in their bodies who either forgot or just don't care what science actually is. Using a science-based program simply means you base your training on the results of others. Training was done, results were observed, now we can use that information to inform our training and make it more productive. The problem is, science-based has become synonymous with ultra-lightweight, slow-moving machine isolation work, but that's just one style of it, a subgenre you might say. That approach happens to be what the popular social media guys are focused on at the moment, but it's no more science-based than anything else proven to work. As we are today, I doubt many would consider the 20-rep squat program a science-based routine, but there's decades worth of data out there proving its effectiveness. Lifters have been using it to build muscle for a long time. Is all that muscle meaningless now because the program doesn't conform to current ideas? No. The effectiveness of heavy compound-focused barbell training for building muscle has been studied thousands of times by now, I'm sure. Is it suddenly not science-based because a few research papers came out saying those movements are too fatiguing or lack stability? No, of course heavy compounds build muscle. They always have and they always will. Current science-based fitness is a clear example of something positive, scientific research, being interpreted in one hyper-specialized way, as I said, ultra-lightweight exercise focused on extreme muscle isolation, then pushed on us on a daily basis as the only interpretation there is. Searching for better ways to train, for the most optimal ways of doing things, the path to more muscle in less time, it's a great thing, and I don't mean to say new studies don't have meaning. If a study proves that something works, it probably does. What I find kinda annoying is when that information is picked up by a small subgroup of lifters and made out to be something that only applies to their one particular style of training. These modern principles and ideas can be applied to any training style to improve its effectiveness, and until someone comes around who actually built more muscle than those who did basic barbell work by training exclusively with the popular ultra-slow lightweight method, saying that method is better is a theory, not a fact. So in honor of science, today I'll be looking at the first video that showed up when I searched science-based workout on YouTube, How to Train for Pure Muscle Growth by Jeff Nippard, and I'll see how my favorite training style, heavy sandbag lifting, holds up to the current scientific research on building muscle. In the video, Jeff outlines 5 bodybuilding principles based on science that must be followed to maximize muscle growth. I should quickly mention, when I say heavy sandbag lifting, I'm referring to heavy lifting focused on the fundamentals, picking a sandbag up off the ground, lifting it from the lap, carrying it, shouldering it, using it for squats, the basics done with heavy weight. Lightweight sandbag cardio circuits are great too, but that's a topic for a different day. The first principle in Jeff's video is tension is king. This principle is the umbrella that everything else exists underneath. To quote what he says, at this point, tension is universally recognized as the primary factor driving muscle growth. Tension is the force that our muscles experience when they stretch and contract under load. I don't think there's much to say here. This applies to anything. If you want your muscles to grow, you need to use them to do things. This point acknowledges the fact that sandbags work. How well do they work? We'll have to keep going. Principle 2 is about using bodybuilding technique to ensure maximum tension is placed on the muscles. This one is made up of 3 parts. The first recommendation here is to focus on tempo, mainly on using slow and controlled negatives or eccentrics lasting 2 to 4 seconds. Jeff says it's likely the eccentric part of a lift is more important for muscle growth, and also that some research suggests slow eccentrics work best when paired with fast concentrics, slow on the way down, fast on the way up. Right away, this might seem like an L for sandbags. While there is a lowering part to many exercises, most of heavy sandbag training is focused on the lifting part. You can stay relatively controlled with things like squats or rows, but usually, and I don't mean for everyone, but most of the time sandbag lifting is focused on performance above all else, on getting better at lifting. For many of us, the only thought we'll have about rep speed is fast, explosive, powerful. Maybe sandbags aren't so great for building muscle then? Hear what Jeff has to say next, and you'll see there's more to it. The second part of bodybuilding technique is using a proper range of motion, which Jeff says is usually a full range of motion, but that there's research indicating using a partial range of motion in the stretched position might be even more hypertrophic than using a full range of motion. Around the time of this video came the obsession with what's become known as lengthened partials. Here's where sandbags make up for the lack of eccentric focus. Most of sandbag lifting uses an extreme range of motion. A sandbag lays completely flat on the ground, so when you pick it up, you're essentially doing a deficit deadlift with your hands all the way down by your feet. When you shoulder a sandbag, it moves all the way from the ground to your shoulder, like some kind of extended range of motion clean. You can take a squat or a box squat as low as you could with anything else. There are plenty of specialty exercises like the one motion lift from the ground to the chest, or the one motion sandbag to shoulder that have you moving the weight a very long way. I could go on. Many muscles in the body are taken through a huge range of motion with sandbags. What about lengthened partials focused on the stretch? Here, it's all about carries. If you want to build a massive upper back, it doesn't get much better than the heavy bear hug carry, and science tells us why. Sandbags are bulky. To hold one against your chest with a bear hug grip, you'll need to reach your arms as far forward as you can. Your scapula will be completely protracted, placing your upper back in a fully stretched position. Add walking to the mix, and with every step, the sandbag will try to move on you, meaning hundreds of micro adjustments, or you might say reps, for the upper back in that stretched position. When I first started training with sandbags and natural stones, I got obsessed with bear hug carries and my back completely changed. It developed a thickness I hadn't seen before. The same idea applies to the biceps too. Every step means movement for the muscles in a stretched position. Carrying a sandbag probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word biceps, but the two go together. Biceps are often the weak link for anyone just getting started with sandbags, and they're pushed to their limit constantly while you adapt and forever thereafter. The bear hug carry is the ultimate lengthened partial. Part 3 of bodybuilding technique is about minimizing momentum to make sure tension is placed on the target muscle. The example Jeff gives is cheating a bicep curl leads to more tension placed on the lower back rather than the biceps. Here it's all about the details. Minimize momentum to make sure tension is placed on the target muscle. What's the target muscle with sandbag lifting? This is where a lot of guys are put off. An argument against sandbag lifting for muscle growth might be, it doesn't work any one thing in particular, so it doesn't work. But that's assuming too much. That's coming from a place where extreme muscle isolation is the universal only way to grow, which is false. You don't need to isolate a muscle for it to grow. I'm not saying you shouldn't, isolation is great too, but to say it's the only way is wrong. Sandbag lifting works most of the body at all times. Some exercises prioritize one thing over another. A sandbag squat might hit the legs more, but still, to even attempt a squat, you'll need to hold the sandbag against your chest, which means your upper body will also be heavily involved in the movement. When the goal switches from isolating one specific muscle to performing at the highest level you can with all sandbag exercises, momentum is no longer a bad thing. With sandbags, most lifters try to use as much momentum as they can, and it works. I won't say sandbags are perfect. There are some muscle groups that will probably grow better with isolation. It'd be hard to replicate the triceps long head growth you get from an overhead extension with a heavy sandbag, for example, but they do a great job with most things. If the goal is tension on the muscles, I'd say sandbags do pretty well in this category. Chapter 3, Effort. This is my favorite part. Jeff starts by saying, you need to push sets hard, and unfortunately, research consistently shows that most people simply don't push their sets hard enough to maximize muscle growth. It's very common to see people hitting the gym year after year, but making no noticeable progress. In most cases, this isn't because they maxed out their natural potential. Instead, it's usually because they simply aren't pushing their sets close enough to failure to stimulate new hypertrophy. He then goes on to recommend leaving a rep in the tank for the first 2 sets of an exercise and going to failure on the 3rd set because some research says complete failure is objectively better, while other research says getting close is good enough. He also talks a bit about managing fatigue here, but that's an entire section later, so I'll disregard that for now and focus on the main point here, effort. Now this is what it's all about. I've probably talked about this 50 times by now. I went into great detail about my experience with effort in my videos Anti-Lifting Amnesia, a case for heavy sandbags and calisthenic circuits, and why sandbags build so much muscle. I'll have those linked in the description if you're interested. But more than any other training style I've tried, sandbags require insane levels of effort. Always. Let's compare them with barbells to see why. A powerlifter who can squat 600 will probably tell you 450 is still difficult. 450 might be submaximal, but it's still a lot of weight. It will likely always require a good deal of effort to complete. For most, 450 falls into the always heavy category. With sandbags, the threshold for always heavy is much lower, often as low as just 150 to 200 pounds. For most lifters, it doesn't matter how far they push. A 200-pound sandbag will always require a great deal of effort to work with. This means that relatively early in your sandbag training career, you'll reach the point where every set requires everything you have. You can't get away with half effort like you could with other things. Every single rep of every single set is hard. Because of this, sandbags condition you to what pushing with a high level of intensity feels like. You get really good at training hard because you have no other choice. It's all in or fail. For me, this was huge. I was one of those guys Jeff mentioned in his video, training year after year, never making it anywhere. I was plateaued at 142 pounds for a very long time because no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get myself to push with the intensity level required to move past the early intermediate stage. For whatever reason, I just didn't have it in me. Sandbags got me through that. They taught me what it truly means to bring the intensity. This is a big part of why sandbags work so well for so many people. They're like a wake-up call. Oh, this is the level I need to be at to keep pushing forward? Now I see why I was stuck for so long. This section is all about progressive overload. Jeff says if you want to grow, you need to increase some kind of training variable from week to week, be it increasing reps while keeping the weight the same, increasing weight while keeping the reps the same, improving some aspect of your technique, or increasing the mind-muscle connection. This part is pretty straightforward. I think most lifters know if you want to grow, you need to force the muscles to handle increasingly more work over time. Sandbag lifting is largely a performance-based sport. Getting better, lifting more weight, doing more reps, becoming more explosive, that's what it's all about. Sandbags and science. Nice. This is the big one, the part where most would assume sandbags fail. Here we're talking about tension versus fatigue, stimulus to fatigue as Dr. Mike calls it. How much tension does an exercise place on a muscle and how hard is it to recover from? This is the part where Jeff recommends focusing more on machines over free weights because they're less fatiguing and because free weights might leave some smaller muscles underdeveloped when bodybuilding is the goal. First, I have to give Jeff props here. Seeing this reminded me why I used to watch all his videos. He doesn't approach this part with the mindset that machines are definitely better than free weights. He instead mentions they are often the better choice when trying to maximize the stimulus to fatigue ratio. I'm always way more likely to listen to someone when they can see both sides, so I appreciated that. Let's focus on the example he used in the video because it really lays the foundation for this whole thing. Jeff says, for example, the deadlift offers a high stimulus because it places a lot of tension on the glutes and the spinal erectors, which is great, but it also carries a very high fatigue demand. It's really hard to recover from, which isn't as great from a bodybuilding perspective. That's a great point. I experienced that myself back when I lifted barbells more. If I tried to push deadlifts more than once a week, I'd end up lethargic and cranky after a few weeks. It really is a lot. Well, the question is, why are deadlifts so fatiguing? Is there something inherently bad about picking things up off the ground, or is it the exercise itself? I think it's the exercise, and the problem is how heavy you can load it. On a good program, it's not uncommon for a lifter to deadlift 400 plus pounds after just a few years of training, and at a certain point, as you become stronger, even if you never max out and train only with sub-maximal weight for higher reps, a heavy weight is a heavy weight. It will always take a lot out of you to deadlift 400 pounds regardless of what your max is. That fatigue adds up. The problem is absolute load. This is why you often see elite deadlifters only training the movement once every couple weeks. If absolute load is what wears you down, then it makes sense to swap the deadlift out for something else that provides a similar training stimulus without all the extra fatigue, so you have more resources left over for the rest of your training. A conventional deadlift lets you lift a lot of weight, but a snatch grip deadlift, for example, forces you to use less weight, letting you get a similar stimulus with less fatigue. You could take it further by adding a deficit, moving your hands out further towards the collars, adding a pause. There are many ways to make the basic deadlift harder, and if you keep following that train of thought all the way down, you'll eventually end up with sandbags. When the movement is lifting things from the ground, sandbags are the ultimate more out of less weight scenario. For most natural lifters who stay at a reasonable body fat level, a 300-pound sandbag is likely to be a very long-term goal. There are exceptions out there, of course, but it will take most lifters many, many years to start working with 300. I can't count the number of guys I've had tell me they can deadlift 400 with a barbell and struggle to lift a 150-pound sandbag. With sandbags, the absolute load will never be anywhere near what it'd be with a barbell. And it gets better. A heavier sandbag is a larger sandbag, and a larger sandbag is harder to lift. Unlike a barbell deadlift where the stronger you get, the worse the stimulus to fatigue ratio becomes, with sandbags, the stronger you get, the better that ratio becomes, because a heavier sandbag forces you into more extreme positions. Lifting a 200-pound sandbag from a horizontal position on the ground might have your hands at just about shoulder width, something like a deficit barbell deadlift, but lifting a 250-pound sandbag from that same position is more like a deficit snatch grip deadlift. Not only is the actual weight heavier, but the exercise itself becomes more difficult. This minimizes fatigue a lot. Well, you might say, that makes sense for picking things up off the ground, but we're talking about muscle here, not movement. What about other hip hinge exercises like ultra range of motion barbell good mornings that let you get more out of even less weight? That works too, but we can't forget that overall fatigue is just as important as managing fatigue with each individual exercise or muscle group. Moving a sandbag from the ground to your lap, from your lap to your chest with a bear hug grip, and carrying it works much more than what you get with a basic hip hinge. The glutes, hamstrings, low back, upper back, lats, traps, core/abs, forearms, biceps, and even the chest and shoulders to a lesser degree all get worked with this one exercise. Maybe the exercise is a bit more fatiguing than something like a good morning set for set, but to get everything you'd get from a bear hug carry, you'd also need to do sets of other things too. Rows, curls, pull-ups possibly. In the end, the total fatigue isn't actually any better. This is probably the biggest flaw in thinking with extreme isolation-based programs. If you split everything up, then you need to do more sets. If you find exercises that hit more things at once, you don't have to do as much total work. The fatigue levels out in the end. And I don't mean to say that's what Jeff is recommending. He still used plenty of compound movements in his video, but that training style is out there. As for the other part Jeff mentioned in this section, smaller muscles may end up falling behind when sticking with basic free weight movements. I agree with that completely. I've seen a lot of growth from sandbags pretty much everywhere, but I personally find combining them with calisthenics and some specific isolation is the ultimate way to build a lot of muscle while having a lot of fun in the process. Not that fun is really a part of Jeff's video, but I do think it's worth mentioning anyway. Sandbags are fun. So what do you think? Did sandbags pass the test? Sure, there were a few areas where they might have missed the mark when going for complete 100% science-based muscle building optimization, but overall they actually did amazing with almost everything Jeff listed in his video. I'm not surprised considering how well they've worked for me, and for the thousands of you I've talked with about sandbags and muscle. Heavy sandbag lifting is the real deal. If you're interested in sandbags and want to know more, consider checking out my book, Sandbag Hypertrophy, over on Amazon. It's a complete guide to using sandbags alongside calisthenics to get strong like a strong man and yoked like a wrestler. Link below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.